Hello all, I'm going to deliver this tutorial on sexual harassment. The first thing to make really clear is we need to give you a trigger warning because of what will be discussed under sexual harassment, and make it really clear from the offset that you're going to feel uncomfortable. And feeling uncomfortable is totally normal, but it shouldn't deter us from having this difficult conversation or outlining this really difficult issue. We will outline what we will do as an institution, but also provide you with strategies to use when you see sexual harassment. So, at the top of this slide would be sexual abuse. And sexual abuse is a spectrum. On the furthest side of sexual abuse is non-consensual sex. So consent was not established, and therefore that act is rape. Sexual assault, so any grabbing, groping, or touching of somebody's parts of somebody's body that are sex organs, is sexual assault. And upskirting, so taking pictures, is all sexual violence under that sexual abuse spectrum. Sexual harassment sits at this end. That's in no way to trivialize it because it's still part of sexual abuse. But we want to be clear that sexual harassment is sexual remarks about somebody's body. So it would be about their breasts or about their genitalia is sexual harassment. Invading somebody's personal space, especially that you don't know, and staring. So staring at somebody's breasts, their legs, their groin, their backsides, or very slowly looking up and down somebody's body. Any sexualized language, and to be very clear, slut and slag are the sexualized language that we are referring to. Any sexually offensive gestures, and repeatedly asking is sexual harassment. So you've made clear the answer is no, and continually asking. What sits in the middle of that sexual abuse is online sexual harassment. So receiving explicit photos or videos, whether it's of somebody else or porn, is sexual harassment. Didn't consent to seeing those images, didn't ask you to receive those images. It's part of sexual abuse. So is repeatedly pressuring somebody to send images of themselves. That repetition is sexual harassment. Cyber flashing is sending an intimate part of your body to somebody else, again, who didn't ask to see that image. And again, it's abuse, to be really clear. So is the non-consensual sharing of intimate photos. So if you're in a relationship with somebody and they choose to send an intimate photo of themselves to you, you sharing that photo or video with somebody else is a criminal offence and is not acceptable. So all of that falls under the heading of sexual abuse. And it's important that you see some examples, because if you have never experienced sexual harassment, it's quite difficult to explain. So this outlines some of those examples. This young lady's just walking through New York.
How you doing today? Wow. That's not good. Wow. What's up, beautiful? Have a good day. Hey, what's up, girl? How you doing? Somebody's acknowledging you. She's engaging you.
Notice the staring at parts of her body.
Hey, beautiful. How are you this morning? Have a nice evening. Nice. Sexy American Eagle. Hello, come on. God bless you. Have a good day, right?
This is the invading of the personal space and repetition. For 4 minutes, he's walked and invaded her personal space. It's threatening. It feels very threatening.
Doing good? Hey, look at that. $5,000.
Again, staring. It's the repetition.
Can I give you my number? Text me? No? You like it? What's up, man? How you doing? Nice seeing you.
Oops. So, sexual harassment often takes place in very public places. So, on the street, on a bus, which really adds to the humiliation. It's worth noting that disproportionately sexual harassment is experienced by girls and women and individuals who are marginalised genders. So, individuals who, for example, are non binary. It's caused by the culture within our society. So it's not an individual bad apple, but it's a culture that generally normalizes it and makes it acceptable. So, for example, most films, there's a glorification of the chase. If you look at any James Bond film or any Harrison Ford film, there's repetition and pushing and pushing and pushing. And that is sexual harassing behavior. And there's also a huge amount of victim blaming. So, what was she wearing? What was she doing? Why was she walking there? Well, she laughed, rather than a focus on the behavior that's problematic. So, we often trivialize it, or it's often trivialized, should I say, with it's a joke, it's banter, you should learn to take a compliment. But we have to focus on the behavior of the person who's doing that sexual harassment and not the victim. We know sexual harassment has a huge impact upon victims. So it can invoke feelings of fear, anxiety, and understandably, anger. You'll notice in the clip as well that sometimes, for example, smile, 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 that actually if you respond, then you can often get anger in return. Smile's an interesting one because what we would just get you to consider is asking a young woman to smile. We would just consider whether you would ask a young man to do the same. And again, it sometimes can cause anger in the victim because often they're getting quite an angry response in return to maybe challenging. We know that 90% of individuals who've experienced street harassment has affected their mental health. It causes psychological distress. Again, it's often very threatening. And also, it often causes individuals to change their clothing, to take different routes home, or, for example, stop running at night. So, it's solvable. Education is the solution. And although it stems from culture and it stems from learnt behaviours, it's solvable because we ultimately can challenge it and correct. So, as an institution, we will challenge sexual harassment. So we will pause and call out that behaviour. So any staring, any repetition, and absolutely, we do not tolerate any sexualized language. So, for example, slag or slut. A lot of sexual harassment can actually take place in the same friendship group. And therefore, any use of that language, whether you see it as banter or a joke, is not acceptable. That language is used to weaponize women, and it's sexual harassment in its use of sexualized language, and therefore is not appropriate whether you consider it as a joke or you consider it as banter. So we call out any sexual harassment that we see. We also ask that you make us aware of any sexual harassment that's been experienced. So, be that on Middle Road, in the canteen, we ask that you make us aware of any sexual harassment that's been experienced, and we will address that behaviour. To remind you, again, the sexual abuse spectrum, that sexualized language, as I've explained to you, is absolutely not acceptable. Staring at parts of people's bodies, invading personal space, and repeatedly asking, as well as things like cyber flashing, sending explicit photos, or anything that trivializes sexual violence. So any jokes around non-consensual acts. So we will challenge that behavior. We also suggest that you do the same in your friendship and peer groups. So we bring about positive social change and we address sexual harassment when we pause and we call out that behavior. Like, I think that's funny. It's not okay. I don't like to be called a slut. I don't see it as a joke. I don't see it as banter. And if there's the option there to call in and explain, well, slut is sexualized language that's weaponized against women, and it's not appropriate. I don't feel comfortable educating and calling, or repeatedly asking is not an appropriate way to handle things. We accept it, we move on. So pause and call out that behavior. Also, we're equipping you to challenge sexual harassment if you are a bystander or a victim. So it's really important to note that there is no right or wrong way to deal with or respond to sexual harassment. And it is never, ever the fault of the individual. There are never a reason why they have been targeted. And it's always important to make sure that you are safe, first of all. But calling out that behavior, so speaking in an assertive tone. So, look, it's not okay. I feel uncomfortable. Assertive tone of voice. Criticizing the behavior. You're invading my personal space and I feel uncomfortable. Could you just step back? I have already made clear, no, please don't keep asking me, or don't keep asking me. So criticizing the behavior. And in all seriousness, if you feel threatened in the moment, you can call for immediate assistance. And you can report after the event. So if you're in that moment, you feel incredibly threatened because there's 2 or 3 individuals, for example, or one individual, you can absolutely call for assistance. And if you've been a victim of sexual harassment, and after the instance, you can still report the event to the police. What about if you're a bystander? So you're on Middle Road, you're on bus or train, and you see sexual harassment experienced by somebody that you don't know. Again, we recommend that you just ensure your own safety first. But if you do feel strong enough and you feel you're safe enough to speak up, you can go over and be firm and be clear. Think she feels uncomfortable. I think that non-binary individual or that person feels uncomfortable. Or after the instance, you check with the individual. Go over, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help you? You could also document it. So we generally all have smartphones, we all have videos. Document it. Record what's happening. Approach the individual. I've made a recording. Can I do anything to help you? So you can be direct and address the behavior. Or if you don't feel that comfortable addressing it, because again, it can be very, very intimidating, going and sitting with the person who's experiencing it and talking to them. Check in afterwards if you didn't feel comfortable going up to them then, and providing any evidence to help that victim. Silence and staring out of the window isn't a way to help address that sexual harassment or address that victim. So we model the challenge. We will call out that behaviour whenever we see it. And we ask you to consider, as bystanders, again, having a focus on what you can do to help support any individuals who've been victims of sexual harassment as well. Okay, thank you very much for your time.